Welcome to Agora by Give Something Back to Berlin. In this podcast series, we'll be finding out how migration has changed our urban landscape and exchange ideas with those who are making a difference. Join us while we tackle issues ranging from human rights and diversity to migrant identity and belonging.
Welcome to the first interview episode of Agora. My name is Marie-Therese Helmschmied. I'm your host for today's episode. And I'm very excited that we're meeting today in this very fitting location, which is the rooftop of Refugio, a project of the Berlin City Mission where old and new Berliners live and work together and where people of different cultures and backgrounds come together and exchange ideas. And joining me today is Rosa Silva from the Deutsche Wohnen Co Enteignen campaign. It's very nice that you're joining us today.
Hi, Marie.
So you are part of the Right to the City group, which is the English-speaking working group from Deutsche Wohnen Co Enteignen. Can you maybe tell me how and why you got involved with DWE?
I got involved in February of this year, so about 6 months ago or 5 months ago. And it was the middle of the pandemic winter, and I was scrolling through Instagram and I saw on the stories, there's always Kiez-Team Verstärkung for each of the different Kiezes, and then there was one in English that was Right to the City, the English language working group. And I had been wanting to get involved, and that was a pretty low barrier entry for me. So I went to the website, wrote them an email, and came to a meeting. And the atmosphere in the Right to the City meetings is just super friendly and welcoming. And so then basically I was hooked.
Do you have any personal connection to why you want to deal with the Berlin housing crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I had a couple of years when I was moving from sublet to sublet, so experiencing really precarious housing. And it's quite clearly a systemic problem in Berlin. So yeah, the campaign for me seems really relevant to all of us. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about the housing crisis, because Berlin used to be a haven for artists, creatives, used to be like a renter's paradise with really low rents. But alone in 2017, the property prices rose by 20.5%. Also, rents between 2015 and 2020 have gone up by 44% because of these property prices in Berlin attracting an unusually high number of big property players. Can you explain maybe a little bit how the housing crisis came about and why prices rose so fast and so much?
Yeah, there are. You're right. All of that happened, and we've experienced what that's like. There are obviously multiple causes, but I think a really significant cause is like short answer, the financialization of the housing market. So, but what does that mean? That means that the landlords of Berlin have changed. So increasingly since 2000, but even more rapidly in the last few years, residential housing in Berlin, also commercial housing, has been bought up by corporate landlords who are investing the funds of global asset management companies. So we're talking about companies like BlackRock, who have, I think BlackRock's assets are valued at about over 8 trillion USD this year. So we're talking about incredibly powerful actors. And this means that the relationship between tenant and landlord has really changed over the last 10 years in Berlin. So where the difference, why these landlords are different, is that because the tenant is no longer their client, the client of these companies. The client of these companies is the shareholder. And the shareholders, with the kind of financial instruments that these companies use, they need quick profits. They need profits in a short time. They need to reduce prices in a really cutthroat manner, and they need to maximize profits every single year for shareholders. That's the financial service that they provide. And what that has meant is this incredible increase in housing insecurity, increase in evictions, and increase in rent.
So what we can say pretty much is that it became not about the people, but about profits. And this is causing the sort of problem that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, we're seeing this kind of, I would describe it as asocial. We've got landlords who have no responsibility to the tenants.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Deutsche Wohnen Co Enteignen has been actively campaigning against private equity firms buying up the city's property since 2018. Can you tell us how the organization was formed and what your main goals are?
So the organisation comes sort of out of the richness of decades of housing initiatives in Berlin. Multiple Kiez-based initiatives or particular tenants who've gathered together, and also tenant like legal centres. And I think it was a subgroup of the Coty Co self-organised tenants group that found this paragraph in the Grundgesetz, the German Grundgesetz, the Constitution, German Constitution, that enables the socialisation of, in this case, housing. And they then saw the opportunity then to create systemic change in Berlin and address this power imbalance between these incredibly powerful global actors and individual Berlin tenants. And they founded this campaign for a referendum. The first step of getting a referendum up is to gather 20,000 signatures, which is what they set out to do in 2018. And they actually managed to gather over 70,000 at that stage. So it has been a really popular campaign in Berlin. You don't have to argue very hard to convince Berliners that the rent needs to go down.
I mean, you're wearing your beautiful vest that people are wearing, and we're seeing them all over the city. And mostly when I'm out and about, a lot of the people that they're asking are actually like, I already signed up. So it's totally right what you're saying. Like people aren't hesitating to like lower rents, not for me.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's definitely working out.
Yeah.
But you are tackling only companies that have 3,000 properties in their, that have bought more than 3,000 properties. But these large housing companies are obviously not the only ones asking for overpriced rent. Why not tackle all landlords?
It's a good question. The campaign has defined what has given a definition of large corporate landlords, and that definition is companies that own more than 3,000 apartments, because it is those companies that are acting. In some ways, they've purchased so many apartments, and they are so powerful. They have big PR departments, they have legal departments. The existing regulations simply they don't have to abide by them. So they have the influence of these companies means that is a bit like a monopoly, or in the previous ownership models, the larger landlords would have had to sort of gang together and form illegal cartels to have the same influence that these new corporate, really large corporate landlords are having on things like the Mietspiegel. So the definition of big corporate landlords being landlords that own more than 3,000 apartments is really designed to target the players, the actors that are having this really systemic influence on the housing market that is too powerful for tenants to deal with. And so what we're proposing is a completely new model for managing housing.
Okay. One of the big problems that we can see in Berlin is that although 20% of the people living here don't have a German passport, they can sign the petition, but their signature won't actually count as valid because they don't have a German passport. What options do these people have to do something about this, or to become also politically active in this issue that affects them just as well as all people with German passports?
Okay, one of the things that the Deutsche Wohnen Co Enteignen campaign has done is they decided really early on to not ask people for their passports before they signed the petition. So We call this political signatures, and when these signatures are counted, we get a figure. This is how many valid signatures were collected, and this is how many invalid signatures are collected. And I think that this has given us a really good way to quantify how many people are living in Berlin who want to have a say in the future of the city, who want to vote in the referendum, and yet their signatures are deemed invalid. I think this has put the issue on the agenda and created the possibility for us to keep being vocal about our demand for voting rights in the city and our demand for enfranchisement in the city.
Is especially problematic because people without German passports oftentimes face discriminations on the housing market, unsafe living conditions, undignified living conditions also, with difficulties concerning like the contract, also issues with registration, Anmeldung, as we all know, like the magic word. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on the specific problems that migrants in Berlin are facing on the housing market?
It's actually really hard to do that in a really short and succinct way.
I believe it. Yeah.
Because different people have different relationships to the border. They have different visas. They have different access to the housing market and different access to the labour market, and all of these things are intertwined. So if you cannot get an Anmeldung, you can't get a job. If you can't get a job, you can't get a contract because you can't demonstrate that you're earning enough money. If your visa means that you only have limited access to the labour market or no access to the labour market, you can't just demonstrate. So
it's like a vicious circle.
It's like a vicious circle, yeah. And so what we hear, certainly from people who are in Right to the City, is that it makes people vulnerable. So they need somewhere to live, so they will accept really exploitative contracts. So sub-renting contracts where the main tenant is not paying any rent, but all the subtenants pay rent to the point that the main tenant is actually profiting from the illegal sub-rent, and yet they can still not Anmeldung. This is a super common situation. And also people get pushed into illegal work to pay for really high rents, which is another situation of vulnerability where exploitation happens really easily. So yeah, these things are all really intertwined, and different migrant communities or different people have different relationships to this. And so for instance, you could have a German passport, but also have a Turkish name and never be invited to even view an apartment or to even submit your applications. So yeah, there's not an easy answer to that question, but there are many ways that people are systematically excluded. They are discriminated against, and migrants are constantly navigating these different barriers to finding housing.
I mean, I think we can all agree that there's definitely a lot of problems that people are facing already with the higher rents, but also way beyond that. But if the rent issue could be attacked, then that would definitely be a first step to making the situation a little bit easier in at least this little part. Is there any chance that these signatures of non-German passport holders can be still included at some point?
I don't, from my point of view, from my analysis, I doubt that we will be able to change the voting laws in Berlin before the referendum. But what we have done is put it on the agenda, and we've made it really visible. Instead of being one small migrant group, we've brought all of the people who are excluded together. We have a quarter of the signatures are invalid. It's hard to ignore that. And it's clear that most of those signatures are invalid because of the passport of the signature giver. Yeah.
I mean, and this is definitely a good step to put it on the agenda and to demonstrate, like, look, there's this many people that are affected by this problem, so can we really ignore these many people that are actually living in the city, being part of the city, but not actually being included in issues that are concerning them?
Yeah, I mean, Berlin markets itself as an international city, a diverse city, a multicultural city, and yet it has disenfranchised a quarter of its population. It's a bad look, isn't it?
It is a very bad look. You have mentioned before that the referendum campaign is trying to use Article 15 of the German Constitution. It allows for socialization of land and property. Can you maybe explain a little bit more what that means and also what it would mean if it's successful? Because there's no legal precedent for this.
Yes.
We're going a little bit legal right now.
Yeah. So you're right. There's no precedent for using this particular article in the Grundgesetz, but certainly there is precedence for expropriation. I mean, the state is doing this all the time for autobahns, for coal extraction. Whole villages and whole streets are expropriated routinely by the state. So it's not the first time something like this has happened, but in this case, the law enables the purchase of the properties that are not being used for the common good. So, in order to use them for the common good, is how that paragraph has been interpreted.
Could we say that then if the referendum was successful, it would actually establish housing as a human right?
I think it would take a really good step, make a really good step towards that, towards establishing housing as a human right. We have calculated that the number of apartments that would fall into this category of being owned by landlords who own more than 3,000 apartments is at least 240,000 apartments. It's difficult to tell exactly how many apartments it is because some companies use shelf companies, so letterbox companies that are collected together under an umbrella. So it's hard to track who owns these apartments, but at least 240,000 apartments. And so if the rent on these apartments was brought much closer to the cost of maintenance, it would not only mean that 240,000 apartments were affordable for the long term in a sustainable way, it would also affect the Mietspiegel and the rents of everyone in the city.
So again, we have to make this very clear here. It's really a good thing for everyone that's renting in Berlin.
We believe it'll make rent fairer for everyone in Berlin. Yeah. And the other thing that is part of the proposal is to create a new form of housing management. So we're not saying that the state should buy these houses and then manage them. We're saying that we should buy these houses and then the management will be from the tenants and from citizens of Berlin. So it's a very democratic management model that we're proposing, and we think this is a really future-oriented, really. It's a new model, and we think it's a really good solution to some of the challenges that the future is going to bring to us. Things like climate change and to have management that is flexible and responsible or accountable to the tenants and their needs. It's going to allow us to make decisions to do things like put in rooftop solar or whatever it is that is necessary.
So kind of what we were saying earlier, to come back from not being about profit, but being about people. Let's talk a little bit about the timeline. So if you get enough signatures for the referendum, what happens next? Like what's the timeline of this?
So we had 4 months to collect 170,000 signatures in this round. And that finishes on the 25th of June, so in just a few days from when we're recording this interview. We are very confident, actually, that we will hand in that number of valid signatures. I believe it will be almost twice that much, actually.
So you already hit the mark?
I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
We don't know until they've been officially counted, but I'm very confident. So once that's happened, it means that this referendum question will be put to the people of Berlin. We expect that to be included in the election in September. So when people go to vote, they will also have the chance to vote for the referendum. We're aiming for 1 million yes votes in September. And so the next phase of the campaign is to convince people to go and vote. Those of us whose signatures are rendered are called invalid, but who would like to vote, we're saying please go and vote for us. even if you don't usually bother going voting, we're saying September is the time to make your way to the ballot box and vote yes for the referendum. Yeah.
So let's talk also a little bit more about your nice vest, because this is the vest that also all your volunteers are wearing in the streets. We just talked about it. How can people actually get involved with DWE? Do you have any volunteer roles that are still necessary to fill, especially also for people that are non-German passport holders? I love this word. I can't just get over it.
Yeah. Yeah. So the whole campaign is volunteer based. So I don't know of anyone who has a paid job in the campaign, and there are tens of thousands of people involved in this campaign. You can imagine the effort that's required to collect that number of signatures. It's involved tens of thousands of people throughout the city. And that means that there really is a role for anyone who wants to be involved, because you can imagine we have teams working on legal issues, drafting the law that we want to present to the Berlin Senate that shapes how these houses are going to be managed, for instance. We have teams working on social media, on Pressarbeit. We have teams training volunteers, so training people in signature collection, training people in argumentation. We have people designing posters. We have people putting up posters. So if you want to get involved, you can go to the Deutsche Wohnen Enteignen website. There's a page called Mitmachen, and on that page you have a whole lot of emails for each of the kids teams, but also the Right to the City group if you prefer to work with English. And we have lots of subgroups, and you're very welcome to join us. And what you'll do is send us an email. We'll send you some information about how to join our next meeting, but we'll also have a call with you to see how to best help you fit in and find something that suits you.
Yeah, I mean, so we can see that there's a lot of different talents that people can have, and for sure there's something for all of these talents.
Absolutely,
to support DWE.
Yeah.
Also, just if you are interested, at the end of this episode, we will put the link to the website into our credits so that you can see it again. Don't worry, just now. We'll fix you up with this. We have a signature question that at the end of every interview we will be asking our guests, which is, what does giving back mean to you?
I think that there's kind of two levels of that, two ways that I want to answer that. One is a personal level. So being involved in this campaign means that I feel really rooted to the city. I have met lots of people and created lots of networks that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So on a personal level, that is really rewarding. But on a sort of a broader level, I feel like I've been part of shaping the future of the city, and it's a future that I think is going to make everyone's lives better. So that's pretty satisfying as well. Yeah.
Rosa, thank you so much for sharing about your work, about the work and the mission of DWE, Deutsche Wohnen Co Enteignen. And thank you guys, of course, for tuning in, and we very much hope that you'll be joining us again for next episode.